Oh, what's the answer? I guess the one you
The Pyro is fire. If robots are the fuel, then ammo packs are the oxygen. Too much of one or too little of the other will cause the fire to falter. But in the right quantities, they let it burn brightly and steadily for an entire mission. Small flickers and short blazes of glory have their place, but high, sustained destruction is the goal. You may have been told that the Pyro is for killing tanks. Sometimes, sure. You may have been told that the Pyro is for pushing enemies away with its compression blast. On occasion. Yeah. Man vs. machine is most often a numbers game, though. A contest of raw power. It's time to unleash your inner W plus M1 hellspawn and burn everything to the ground. The Pyro's stock primary is a solid weapon. It can do good base damage, it can set things on fire, it can generate compression blasts that reflect projectiles and push enemies backward, and it can even heal you while extinguishing burning teammates. Unlike most stock primary weapons, it even has something that most of its alternatives lack: reliable airblast. All other Pyro primaries either can't airblast, use more ammo to airblast, or have a longer cooldown between blasts. What the stock flamethrower and its reskins lack is any sort of damage boosting mechanism, which can make you feel a little underpowered in tough situations. The backburner, meanwhile, trades random crits and airblast efficiency for automatic crits against an enemy's backside. This isn't always reliable against regular bots, but it can rack up incredible damage against giants and especially bosses with their slow movements and large health pools. The backburner can still airblast, but this burns through ammo very quickly, so use it sparingly. The degreaser has a bad reputation because it's designed for a combo playstyle that frankly sucks in MVM. If you look at its actual downsides compared to the stock though, they're really not that big a deal. The increased ammo usage for compression blast is fairly small, and I'd be surprised if Afterburn accounts for more than 6 to 7% of the average stock Pyro's damage output, meaning that the relative debuff on the degreaser is probably less than 5%, and only against enemies that are actually affected by Afterburn in the first place. Meanwhile, the faster weapon switching can be quite helpful to Pyros who actually use their other weapons for mobility, combat, or utility. So, while the degreaser is arguably a slight downgrade from the stock, it's really not that clear cut. In fact, it seems to me that the rapid switching has really good synergy with a certain overpowered secondary weapon that shall not be named. The Dragon's Fury can certainly be fun to play with, but it's not really that strong in typical MVM gameplay. Unlike other flamethrowers, it shoots discrete projectiles instead of a stream of particles. Obviously, this means you have to aim at your targets. There's nothing wrong with weapons that require skill, and the Fury rewards consecutive shots with increased rate of fire and a large damage bonus, but the payoff is ultimately just destroying one or maybe a few tightly clustered enemies at a time. This can be good against giants and bosses, but other flamethrowers can usually do more for less effort. Even the Afterburn and Airblast are nerfed, with shorter Afterburn duration and longer compression blast cooldown time than other flamethrowers. And since the fireballs are coded as projectiles, they're vulnerable to airblasting pyrobots, though apparently not deflector heavies. Ultimately, this weapon kind of makes the Pyro like a weaker version of the soldier that doesn't have splash damage, can't random crit, and can only attack at short range. The best thing it has going for it is that it can kill Uber medics with some reliability, and it's the second best Pyro weapon for tank busting after the Phlog. Speaking of which, similar to the backburner, the Phlogistinator has no random crits, but it also gives up airblast completely in favor of the meter that fills when the Pyro inflicts enough fire damage. A right click or primary taunt with a full meter makes you briefly invulnerable before unlocking up to 10 seconds of on-demand critical hits. The Phlog is an old enough weapon to have actually been rebalanced for MVM, so it takes 4 times as much damage to charge against robots as against human players, and nearly 10 times as much against tanks. Given the amount of damage dealt in a round of MVM, it's obviously still very easy to charge the meter, making the Phlog arguably the strongest Pyro primary for MVM and my personal favorite choice. Oh, and that lack of compression blast? Yeah, for most players, eliminating the temptation to airblast at inappropriate times is arguably a good thing. It's barely even a downside in MVM. And now for a brief montage of conveniently timed Phlog Ubers. Welcome back. The detonator is my favorite Pyro secondary since it mitigates the Pyro's weakness at long range while also providing increased mobility with explosive jumping. The alt-click detonation mechanic can be used to set whole groups of robots on fire, shoot around corners, compensate for off-target shots, jump over fences, or climb up on top of tanks. More on that later. The flare gun is a good medium to long range weapon too, but it's more optimized for single target damage. It gets full crits against burning robots instead of having exploding flares, so you need to aim more and you can't explosive jump with it. The thermal thruster is another mobility option that lets you easily jump around the map, and it has a taunt kill, which is cool. For 300 credits, it can also be upgraded with a stunning ability that some people like to use on robots. The Man Melter is a flare gun that allows you to extinguish teammates and gives you a free crit in return. It's nothing too special, but it can make up for the Phlogistinator's inability to put out fire. The Gas Passer provides a reliable
temporary burst of skill
for anyone who cares to use it, as long as they remain connected to the item server and aren't playing on a community server that nerfs it. Even after Valve removed the weapon's ability to charge itself, it's still pretty effective at bypassing gameplay, which makes it very popular among people who want to skip as much of the video game as possible and get straight to the loot drop. There's a good chance that you like playing video games though, since you're watching this relatively long YouTube video about playing video games. If that's the case, then the Gas Passer probably isn't for you. Unlike the Gas Passer, which is the result of a very unfortunate balancing decision, the Scorch Shot's ability to knock back robots from a distance, including giants, is definitely bugged. Valve tried to fix it once before, only to have it break again. It's game-breaking in a way that's more annoying than OP though, and the fact it tends to drag out missions means that it's a lot less popular than the Gas Passer is. The stock shotgun and panic attack are basically pointless. Your flamethrower or melee is always going to be better at short range, and one of the flare guns is always going to be better at long range. It's not a major handicap, and you don't need to equip something else, but you'll probably want to unless you're dealing with vaccinator medics or something. The reserve shooter is even worse, except maybe against parachuting robots. The Pyro's stock melee is an axe. You can hit stuff with it. Otherwise, there's not much to say. The Power Jack is one of my go-to choices for this slot. It provides a speed boost balanced by extra damage vulnerability when active, and it heals 25 health per kill. Good for crossing the map on foot or for making a quick escape. The Home Wrecker is a popular utility option since it allows you to remove sappers off of an engineer's buildings when he's too busy or too dead to do it himself. The Third Degree is a melee weapon that hits everything connected to its target by medigun beams at once. Since MVM has a lot of giant robots being healed by multiple medics, this is a reasonably reliable way to take care of Uber meds, making it the honorable dueling saber to the Gas Passer's cowardly drone strike. The Back Scratcher gives a modest damage bonus and makes health packs give more healing to the Pyro in exchange for a severe penalty on medic and dispenser healing. It may not be the best idea if you have a medic on your team, or at least a medic that actually pays attention to you, but otherwise, it's an upgrade from the stock. It has some interesting uses like reliably two-shotting Uber medics and even helping your medic to build Uber charge. So maybe yes medic. I don't know, give it a try and let me know what you think. The Neon Annihilator has a lower base damage but will automatically crit any robot that's wet. It's not that good, but there do tend to be a lot of robots covered in piss and on your average MVM server, so why not? Unless maybe you're playing medieval MVM or something, the Sharpened Volcano Fragment is pointless, the Extinguisher has been nerfed to oblivion, and the Hot Hand is just kind of silly. So let's move on to upgrades. Now, the Pyro is a bit of a departure from the classes I've covered before. The Scout and the Spy are speedy classes with special abilities that help keep them alive where other classes don't stand a chance. The Sniper and the Soldier can use range and cover to avoid taking damage, and the Engineer rarely even fights the robots directly. For all of those classes, the best defense is usually a good offense. Focus on upgrading your weapons, not your resistances. The Pyro is different. The Pyro can only upgrade its DPS by about 100%, which is less than most other classes, and it gets up close and personal with robots without the benefit of special abilities like the Scout or the Spy have. So is it better to invest in raw offense, or to invest in survivability so you can stay alive and do more damage in the long run? The answer is, it depends. For missions where staying alive is no problem, the Pyro should go ahead and sink most of its early game credits into offensive power, meaning additional damage and ammo capacity. This is especially true of Pyros that are doing more tank busting than robot fighting. In situations where staying alive is harder, buying upgrades that keep you alive and let you play more aggressively can be more valuable than maximum damage upgrades. Plus 25 health on kill is a key upgrade for the Pyro, and even glass cannon builds should consider buying it. And not just one tick, this ability should be fully upgraded by the end of most missions. Large amounts of health on kill allow the Pyro to wade through enemies while out-healing any damage taken, which is very important for taking on groups of small bots that don't kill you in one hit. Plus 10% movement speed is complementary to health on kill. The faster the Pyro moves, the less damage it takes. As long as it heals faster than it takes damage, the Pyro can chain kills almost indefinitely. Resistances also help keep the Pyro alive, although they're more expensive and are specific to certain types of damage. You'll probably want to focus on movement speed when dodging or out-healing incoming attacks is feasible, but you'll need some resistances when it's not. Fortunately, the Pyro's flamethrowers are relatively cheap to upgrade, so even if you invest in offense first, it won't be long before you can start buying resistances. Which resistances to buy, of course, depends on the mission, but I feel that blast resistance is usually the most useful of the three main damage types since the Pyro is vulnerable to splash damage at close range. Bullet resistance and, in spite of what you may have heard, fire resistance are also good when there's a lot of bullet or fire type damage. And remember to always buy crit resistance when there's early game crit spam, or late game crit spam. Sorry if that's a bit of a non-committal description of the ideal upgrade path, but it's a balance. It really does depend on the mission, the team composition, and even your personal skill level and playstyle. Judgment is required. But don't worry too much about screwing up. Erring on the side of survivability is usually the safer choice since you know you'll be at minimum half as effective in any given situation as you would be with theoretically optimal upgrades, and probably a lot more effective than that. You can't really mess up that badly in terms of upgrade order as long as you make sure to avoid the completely useless upgrades altogether. You may have noticed that I didn't mention burn time or burn damage. Plus 25% burn damage does actually increase afterburn damage, but as I said earlier, afterburn isn't really that big a deal, so this is definitely a low priority upgrade. Increased burn time, meanwhile, has been completely non-functional for flamethrowers since they overhauled the Pyro's game mechanics for the Jungle Inferno update. So you're literally burning your money if you buy it. Of course, the Dragon's Fury keeps things simple by not even having access to these upgrades, which I guess is another point in its favor as far as newbies are concerned. Typically, plus 25% airblast force isn't very high priority either, since airblast is only situationally useful and the base level is usually plenty. Don't waste money on your secondary or melee either, and you'll be fine. Playing as the Pyro in MVM is a lot like playing as the Scout, except that it doesn't need to aim and can just spray down all of its enemies with fire. This means that you can juke, jump, and weave like a madman to avoid taking damage without really worrying about missing your targets as a result. And you'll need to because the Pyro doesn't have access to money overheal like the Scout does. The key to staying alive and fighting is to make sure that you're being healed, usually by health on kill, faster than you're taking damage. You can only heal so much, so you need to minimize damage taken. In addition to ensuring you have appropriate resistances, this means movement. Robot AI only reacts at a finite speed and isn't very good at leading shots, so the more you move, the more shots it will partially or completely miss. There are a lot of maneuvers in the Pyro's toolbox for this, and many of them apply to other classes as well. Strafing, circle strafing, back and forth strafing or weaving, popping in and out of cover, crouch jumping to minimize its hitbox, but mostly just a lot of strafing. You want to be moving across the robot's field of vision so that it needs to actively track you and shoots where you used to be instead of where you're going. As I mentioned in the Scout video, the closer you are to the robot when you strafe, the higher your angular velocity is from the robot's perspective. And if you were a business major in college, that just means the robot has to turn faster to keep up. If head-on combat isn't feasible, you can try flanking and attacking from the rear, or attacking around corners. If it's not even safe to get close that way, then maybe it's best to hang back for a few seconds and shoot flares or something. If the Pyro can never safely get close, then that's what I call a poorly balanced mission. When the opposite is true and it's not only safe, but actually easy to get close, try body blocking giant robots by standing firmly in front of them and spraying them with fire. This not only results in a lot of damage, but also halts the bomb's progress, buying your team a bit of time. Unfortunately, now we're going to have to go on a bit of a tangent to explain how flamethrower damage works, because it's actually quite complicated and I definitely need to consult another source to explain it. According to the wiki, flamethrowers shoot out a bunch of fire particles, starting with the, say it with me, Jungle Inferno update. If any particles hit an enemy, it doesn't matter how many, then that enemy takes fire damage. It takes about 1 second of fire damage for an enemy to heat up, and they don't take full damage until that happens. Fire particles also lose potency the longer they're airborne, so enemies take less damage the further away they are. Makes sense. It's a really complicated way of saying that fire does more damage up close and with increased exposure time. Afterburn also increases with exposure time. A brief blast of fire will leave a target smoldering for about 3 seconds, but a giant that's been roasted for a while will continue burning for up to about 10 seconds after it stops getting hit with fire. It's all pretty intuitive except for the part where fire can go through robots and hit more robots behind them. The final pyro mechanic we haven't talked about yet is airblast, or compression blast. And holy crap, I didn't realize how broken it was until I made this video. I mean, I knew that it's been glitched for a while, but I didn't realize how bad. I guess I've just played very little Man Up since 2017, and since I usually run Phlog, the only real chance I had to notice the new airblast in action was to pay attention to the occasional semi-competent, non-Phlog, non-gas passer pyro that actually used the stock flamethrower. The community MVM events I've been playing lately typically nerf airblast via server settings, similar to how they nerf the gas passer. Basically, airblast isn't supposed to work very well on giant robots, and especially not against bosses. But for the past 5 years, you've apparently been able to just shove giants around like little bitches in Man Up. The reason it looks silly is that it is silly. The game is not supposed to work like this. Now, in spite of how comically broken airblasting giants is with default settings, I don't think that it actually makes a huge difference with regard to strategy, whether you're playing on a server that fixes the issue or not. Keep in mind that I'm used to playing on servers where it's weaker than many viewers might be accustomed to, but airblast is still a pretty situational ability. A lot of new players will remember getting called W plus M1 pyros in PvP, and they might assume that using airblast is a sign of skill and refinement. But Man vs. Machine is mostly about damage output. Sure, you can do all of the usual TF2 things with airblast, extinguishing teammates, reflecting projectiles, stuffing Ubers, yeeting enemies off of cliffs, etc. Those are all fine and good, but they're not really that important of a part of MVM gameplay. The big MVM specific thing you can do with airblast is resetting the bomb. There are two kinds of bomb resets, soft and hard. Soft resets are when you force the robot with the bomb off of the invasion route, forcing it to backtrack to get to its intended path. A good example of this is pushing the robots into the pit on Decoy, though you can do this on virtually any map. Robots are not smart, and they will go the long way around to resume their original route rather than attempting to push up an alternate path. Hard resets are when you push the robot with a bomb into a death pit. Only some maps have death pits, with the official examples being Coal Town's mining shafts, Big Rock's subterranean stream, Manhattan's grinder, and Rottenberg's historic Mad Doctor, Mad Scientist, and Witch disposal shaft. Destroying the bomb in one of these pits will force the robots to spawn a new bomb back at the beginning of the map. I'm not a fan of either hard or soft resets. First, they can be tricky to pull off. Second, they only make sense when you've already lost a lot of ground, a situation that Pyros skilled enough to actually do it well are less likely to be in. Third, it drags out the game, which is especially painful when you end up losing anyway. Fourth, it's a really good way of buffing the bomb carrier. Remember, non-giant robots get more and more buffed the longer they carry the bomb, ultimately resulting in a crit-boosted robot that heals 45 health per second and shares a defensive buff with all of its friends. If you soft reset a non-giant robot, or if you hard reset the bomb and it respawns with a non-giant robot, the bomb carrier is likely to be fully buffed by the time it reaches the front line again. If you were already losing, this is probably not the result you were looking for. I will note, though, that throwing robots into the grinder on Manhattan seems to have become pretty common, since this is the only location where Valve made the questionable map design decision of putting the death pit right next to the robot spawn. Now that airblast is broken, it's become rather easy to chuck giants into the grinder and man up. And if there were any map where I would spend credits upgrading airblast force, it's probably that one. On servers where airblast is fixed, pyros are less likely to be able to successfully reset the bomb, so you'll see some pyros spamming airblast to juggle robots and stall instead. In general, spamming airblast is not an optimal tactic in Man vs. Machine because killing robots with fire is faster and more effective. Think about it. When you're spamming airblast, you're using up ammo and exposing yourself to danger, but you're not doing damage, you're not healing yourself with health on kill or damage-based mechanics, you're not using your left and right keys to avoid damage as much as you should, and you are making the robots move in unpredictable ways that will make it harder for your teammates to aim. This is the style of bad gameplay that kept the Pyro out of the meta until Jungle Inferno gave us the OP gas can. When you spam airblast, you're theoretically causing your team's damage output to drop by at least 17%, and probably more. Just think about that when you're trying to decide if airblast is worth it or not in any given situation. If a robot walks near to a death pit and you're able to knock it in, by all means do so. But you shouldn't go into a game planning to use this niche stall tactic unless you're fishing for achievements. The desperate situations that W plus M2 pyros fantasize about are not normal and are usually not salvageable. Most MVM teams will benefit more if you just focus on burning robots. One advanced technique that only applies to the Phlogistinator is taunt cancellation. The idea is that you jump on top of a moving object, usually a tank or a giant robot, and activate your there. If you do it right, you'll fall off before the taunt is over, giving you back control of the pyro. You'll get to use your crits for longer, and you'll even get to keep the tail end of the taunt's uber charge. This technique can be a bit tricky to pull off, so don't feel bad if you can't do it reliably. It's not a core part of pyro gameplay or anything. Just don't waste too much effort jumping on things such that you cancel out the benefit of the free crits. Now it's time for the part of the video you've all been waiting for, the one where I talk about burning tanks. The Pyro has a reputation as a tank killer in MVM, and it's pretty well deserved. All of its primary weapons do good damage against tanks. Perhaps more importantly, they can all reach their maximum output quickly and start off doing good damage even without any upgrades at all. Also, since most tanks don't fight back, the Pyro is often able to reach its theoretical maximum DPS against them, since being a short-range class doesn't matter. The Phlogistinator is arguably the greatest tank-killing weapon. I say arguably because any weapon that currently has a claim to that title has quite a few asterisks after it. For our purposes, the Phlog has the highest sustained DPS against regular tanks under most circumstances that I regard worth considering. Like, I don't care if a skilled soldier with the airstrike can take out a single, smallish tank faster, assuming he has 8,000 credits, can spam crit canteens, and sacrifices a young goat to the elder gods during the full moon. The Phlog's maximum tank killing power is sustainable, repeatable, and actually relevant to real situations that occur in most rounds of MVM, not just theoretical constructs on an empty testing server. The Dragon's Fury is the Pyro's next best tank killer thanks to its reload bonus for repeated hits and the fact that tanks automatically take triple damage. All of the other flamethrowers are above average, but they're liable to be outclassed by a good scout or soldier. Here are some charts that show roughly how the Pyro's weapons stack up against other anti-tank tactics in MVM. Another consequence of the Jungle Inferno update, and I will count this as a mechanic, not an exploit, is that there are actually tactics for how to fight a basic MVM tank. You want your damage to be calculated based on the newest, freshest fire particles coming out of your weapon. Since tanks have such thick hitboxes, if you just shoot straight into them, your damage is going to be calculated based on particles buried deep in the hitbox. If instead you aim at the corner between two intersecting planes of the tank's hitbox, the particles will pass through faster, maximizing damage. This is frequently simplified within the community as aim up, but you can actually aim sideways too. Not down underneath the tank though. I think the particles bounce off of the ground and back up into the tank. This works for all flamethrowers, except for the Dragon's Fury and its projectiles, and will increase your DPS by about 20 to 25%, which is a lot. Anyway, like most weapons, the Dragon's Fury can still do slightly more damage to the tank from the side, thanks to damage ramp up and standing closer to the center of the entity. Also, it should be known that all flamethrowers can shoot through the tank and hit robots on the other side, even the Dragon's Fury. This is great because you can use the tank as a shield, and it's especially good for the Phlog because robot damage charges the meter faster than tank damage does. So if you're using the Phlog, try to find opportunities to attack robots at the same time as attacking the tank to boost your damage.
See, this is one of those things that isn't accounted for when comparing different weapons against tanks in a controlled setting.
Another neat trick is that you can use the detonator or other means to jump up on top of the tank. This can put you in a precarious position if you're near the front line, but if the tank's a little further back, it accomplishes two things. First, it keeps you out of stabbing range of spy bots, if there are any of those around. Second, it allows you to catch all of the money that gets shot out of the top of the tank when it explodes, instead of waiting for it to scatter and come back down.
Looks like there's a big turd coming.
And guess what? When you're standing on top of the tank trick still works. Just burn the edges of the hitbox, not the middle. Some custom missions feature special custom tanks, such as tanks with turrets, tanks with sticky bomb cannons, tanks with magical defenses, and even airborne blimp tanks. The Pyro is less good at destroying most types of custom tanks because they're generally more difficult or dangerous to attack at close range. But even normal tanks can be hazardous to fight. Obviously, when a tank is surrounded by enemies, it's dangerous for the Pyro to get close. Not to mention, tanks can crush you, as anyone who's played a few rounds of MVM surely knows.
You there, are you a pyromaniac attempting to commit arson on your neighbor Karen's treaded sports utility vehicle with suspiciously heavy armor? Be careful, tanks are coded in the game as non-player entities. They cannot be blocked or slowed down, and the game will not allow you to occupy the same physical space as they do. So, if you should happen to be pushed into a wall, ceiling, or other solid object by a tank, you will die instantly. Beware of your surroundings. Karen is watching.
Boss robots are a lot like tanks that shoot back, but they give very little rage when attacked, meaning that the Phlog is actually relatively weak against them without an alternate source of charge. Most are theoretically supposed to be extremely resistant to airblast too, but again, airblast is broken in MVM. Unlike tanks, bosses can be body blocked, and they also have backs, meaning the back burner is at its finest against bosses, assuming the Pyro doesn't have aggro. Spy robots in MVM aren't particularly stealthy, so the Pyro's ability to set cloaked spies on fire isn't as much of an advantage as it usually is. In fact, more mobile classes like the Scout and the Soldier are often better at hunting down spy bots than the Pyro is. At the same time, spy bots aren't that threatening as long as you don't stand still and stay aware of your surroundings. As I mentioned earlier, the Pyro does have some weapons capable of somewhat reliably taking out uber medics without popping them. And also that one weapon that just deletes. If you don't have one of those weapons equipped and there's another class that is able to more easily drop the ubers, it's polite to avoid setting the medics on fire until they do so. If not, or if that class is dead, you can take the opposite route of setting them on fire as soon as possible so their ubers run out sooner. If you have access to airblast, you can also try pushing the medic bots out of range of their patients or otherwise stuffing the uber, which can be useful sometimes. Watch out for Battalion's backup soldiers. Since two of the Pyro's most popular flamethrowers are crit-based, these robots can reduce its effectiveness quite a bit. Don't worry about getting behind these robots with the back burner, and avoid wasting your Phlog crits on them. If you see an engineer robot, try to kill it before it can set up a sentry. Sentries are very effective at area denial and can shut down a short-range class like the Pyro pretty easily. If you're able to get close to a sentry, you may be able to take it down with circle strafing, but otherwise just call out the location to one of your teammates and hope they can handle it. Taking out NGs and sentries from a distance with flares is possible, but is usually not the most efficient use of your time. When giant scouts are in play, do your best to stay between them and the hatch. You want them to be running into your flames, not away from them. Hopefully you can help body block them as well. Stalling giant scouts is also one of the situations where airblast juggling is more widely accepted as useful, but don't get too carried away. If you jump on a random public server and select the Pyro, what will your teammates expect of you? Well, some will want you to equip the gas passer, and some will very much not want you to equip the gas passer, so let's not open that can of worms. The first and most obvious thing is that you are assumed to be the team's tank buster. As you should know by now, this isn't necessarily the optimal strategy, especially if you don't have the Phlog or Dragon's Fury equipped, but it will be your teammate's default assumption. Be sure to clearly communicate to them if you think you'll need help destroying the tank, or even if you think the wave calls for a different class to be the main tank buster. Most teams have a scout, and a Pyro Scout duo can take down virtually any non-custom tank you're likely to encounter. And if you have trouble getting the scout to help you wreck the tank, be sure to post a link to my scout video in the chat. Occasionally, you'll be asked by teammates to use airblast to arrest giant scouts, to reset the bomb, or to goalkeep the bomb hatch. Juggling giant scouts in front of a sentry or heavy can legitimately be helpful if your team is having trouble stopping them. But I've already explained how I think the other two uses of airblast are dubious tactics. Some players will even go so far as to ask you to switch to an inferior flamethrower just to engage in stall tactics. Fortunately, a lot of players are annoyed by pyros who juggle robots since it throws off everyone's aim, and official Valve servers have been nerfed to the point that the bomb being anywhere near the hatch has become increasingly rare anyway, so I don't think that you're actually expected to use airblast on most servers. Even less commonly, you may be asked to spy check as if you were some casual Dust Bowl pie bro. That's not usually a thing in MVM, and the soldier is usually better at chasing down spies, but if you find yourself in a situation where you think you'll be most useful watching the back of an NG or heavy who's in the zone, go for it. Finally, other players might expect you to die a lot, and you might. The Pyro does tend to die a bit more often than most other classes. That's fine though, your kill streak doesn't matter as long as you get the job done. Unless you have weapons that make your eyes glow, then kill streaks matter a lot. This has been the Man vs. Machine tutorial series, The Pyro, with Mr. Underscore, in what I assume has been the most controversial video of the series. If you disagree with this video and have still managed to make it this far, I promise that the dislike button still actually does show up on my end, and you can still try to hurt my feelings if you engage with the algorithm. Otherwise, if you're a new player who's learned something, consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribe to the channel. If you're an experienced player who thinks I forgot something, comment it below and maybe I'll add it to the video errata. Until next time, and don't sniff any gasoline, okay? Cheers.